What's going on, AP World Historians? This is your AP World History teacher, Ben Osborne, and boy, do I have a special treat for you today. We're going to go over the Mongols today, which is a very, very popular topic within world history because they are so interesting, but we're going to do a little contemporary history as well as we examine what sometimes is called one of the worst movies ever made, also called the movie that killed Hollywood, and I'll tell you why that is in just a second. But let's check it out. So this is The Conqueror original theatrical trailer. So this is a movie that was made in the 50s, maybe it was the 60s, but it stars some very interesting people in the story of Temujin, or Genghis Khan. So let's do a little kind of MST3K kind of thing here and check this little video out, okay? So here we go. Let's check it out. So first off, that is absolutely not the Mongolian plains. That is probably somewhere in California, it's actually in Utah for part of it, which we'll talk about in a second. Howard Hughes, the famous guy, is the producer of it. And here we have The Conqueror. Now, you wouldn't expect John Wayne or Susan Hayward to star in this film, seeing as how they are nowhere near Mongolians. So that's kind of weird. Also, they tended to cast Hispanic actors as Mongols, because this was a very different time. So this area they're running around in, again, is part of Utah. It's part of the desert, which is really not what Mongolia looks like at all. Notice, if you can, the perspective and the portrayals of Mongols.
Temujin, under his heel the cowering nations, in his arms the unconquered woman. He took what he wanted when he wanted it. Bortai meets his fire with ice, matches his fury with flame.
Your hatred will kindle into love.
Before that day dawns, Mongol, the vultures will have feasted on your heart.
Okay, so none of that is going to be true. First off, I love John Wayne's accent because it's basically just John Wayne. There's no attempt whatsoever. Also, Borta was not exactly resistant to this whole situation. They make her out as sort of a damsel in distress, but that is not the case. Not good.
Jamuga, tempted to barter an empire for a woman's love.
Suppose, having taken your favors, I refuse the favor
that
you
is
seek.
Pedro Jimenez.
Then I would reveal your betrayal to Temujin. Horses for me and my slave woman, and safe conduct out of this camp.
I am tempted, woman.
Whoa. In this film, there's a big portrayal of the difference between the Mongols and sort of civilized society, but here we have barbaric passions of the Mongols, throwing knives, savage conquests.
For while I have fingers to grasp a sword,
It's the worst accent.
and eyes to see, your treacherous head is not safe on your shoulders, nor your daughter in her bed.
So many trick horse falls. This movie was basically made with a whole bunch of Western extras dressed up as Mongols, so they had tons and tons of these horse falls, which I know look terrifying. And sometimes they did hurt the horses. Alright, so why am I showing you this? Well, it's because it's really important for us to think a little bit about what the perspective of the West is on the Mongols. We typically think of them as these monsters, these angry people all the time, as portrayed in this situation, that they have these barbaric passions and stuff. But in reality, we're going to find that they are a totally different kind of group. Sure, they did have these conquests, they did have a lot of terrible things they did in their names, but at the same time, they're also going to be people who have a unique perspective on the world and have some very unique things that we today can see as kind of interesting and positive. One thing that's interesting about this film, though, just to wrap this little segment up, is that this film was produced by Howard Hughes. He's the famous aviator guy and like millionaire, billionaire. And this movie didn't do that badly at the box office. It did okay, but it widely was panned after the fact. And so it was so embarrassing to him that Howard Hughes bought up every single copy of this movie, and they did not get it released again until 1979 when he finally died. So this movie was like out of commission for a long time. It's kind of difficult to find nowadays because nobody really wants to own it too much. But one of the most interesting facts about this film, however, is that it was filmed, as that beautiful background right there, it was filmed near St. George, Utah. And at the time, St. George, Utah was downrange of a lot of American nuclear tests, including nuclear tests that were going on right before this actual movie was filmed. So all these scenes where they're kicking up dust, that dust is kind of radioactive. So later on, a lot of the people who starred in this film died of cancers of various types, including lung cancer. Now, a lot of these people smoked a lot, like John Wayne smoked like 6 packs a day. But there's been some epidemiologists who've looked at it, and they indicated that it is likely that you would maybe have 30 people to get cancer out of a group of 200 that helped make this film, and something like 93 people ended up getting it instead. So it is sometimes called, again, the movie that killed Hollywood. But let's take a look at the Mongols in general and see if we can kind of tease out a little bit there about them, and see if we can figure out something unique and different about them. All right. So when we're taking a look at the Mongols here, we got a couple of different things that we want to check out. First off, all those exclamation points, right, makes it really important and makes you really want to look at it. So the early Mongols, there's a lot of nomadic peoples that exist in the world, including the Huns, Turks, Arabs. These groups are people who move back and forth, but none have really had as large of an impact as the Mongols through their conquests. They unified the world, basically, throughout all of Asia, but it only lasted a really short period of time. Mongols were people who lived on the steppe, and a steppe is a dry grassland at high elevation. This steppe land meant that they didn't really need gigantic, big, strong horses. What they needed was these sort of strong little ponies that could survive that environment well. So they made their living with herds of livestock and a little bit of hunting on the side. They lived in yurts, and they tended to move from place to place. These are kind of like semi-sedentary, like they would live in a place for a month or two until the resources ran out and then move on to someplace else. They base their lives around kinship systems, so clans, tribes, things like that are the most important parts about their political system. And that is really going to be important for Genghis Khan because that's one of the ways he's going to be able to gain control is through subverting that system a little bit. All right. So here is an image of where Mongolians live today. You can see that big red area up there. That is where Mongolian people exist. So, of course, Mongolia, that makes sense. There's also a sizable amount of Mongolians that live in China. But look out there to the west, and you can see little bits and pieces around in different areas, just indicating sort of where they got to. And if you see that orange kind of borderline that's all around Asia, that is the furthest extent that the Mongolians conquered at their height, at their highest point, about 100 or 150 years into their reign. Again, this is a good image here for you. It's a good image there for you of sort of what life was like there. This is going to be a big, broad, open plain. It's very cold most of the time, very warm in the winters, warm in the summers, cold in the winters. And they are going to live in these things called yurts, which are sort of like semi-permanent tents. So there's a felt around the outside of it, and there's a whole bunch of wood on the inside, and that helps to keep the whole thing warm and cozy on the plains of the steppes. Mongol culture was surprisingly open to new ideas and cultures. They were kind of cosmopolitan. They were okay with outsiders and their ideas and concepts, particularly when they start conquering territories, and they realize just how important and how useful some of those things can be for them. Religiously, they were animist and worshipped a sky god called Tengri, but a lot of Mongols were Nestorian Christians, which is a slightly different Christianity, and Buddhists. They weirdly kind of hate blood and dead bodies, which is kind of strange to us today because we think of them as being these savages and so forth. But they felt that it was ritually polluting and wrong, so they tended to really not want to be around that. They were okay with, killing people, but they didn't want to be around those things after the fact. Their social system was, again, based on clan lineage. They had slaves kind of all the way up through their society, but under Genghis, merit allowed for some social mobility. Not up into the highest levels, but definitely within the kind of lower levels of their society. Genghis Khan himself, he was born as Temujin, and one of the things that he is born into is that the Mongols and these other steppe tribes are just fighting each other constantly. So this guy Temujin is going to change all of that. So he is going to unify the country with political savvy and subtle changes of tradition. So those subtle changes are things like meritocracy, advancing people on merit, reorganizing the Mongol military system, and so forth. In 1206, he took the name Great, or Genghis Khan. And then in 1215, he will conquer the Jin Empire. If you remember the Song dynasty, this is the empire that conquers the Song and pushes them south into the southern Song as opposed to the northern Song period. After that period, then, he will turn west, take on this empire called the Zhizhia, or the Tangut, and they will make it to the Caucasus, which is a place all the way out to the west near Russia, by the time he died in 1227. And then they will bring his body back, and he will be buried in Mongolia. Well, he's not buried, actually. They practice something else. But regardless, he dies and is taken back to Mongolia. One thing that's interesting about Mongol warfare is that it's based on highly skilled mounted units. Archers in particular is very important. They're going to ride on their horses, shooting bows and arrows at people to try to kill them. They again are quote unquote all about that W. They want the win. They don't care about the honor or things like that. So they can do things like fake retreats, which normally would be considered to be dishonorable by Western knights. They don't care. They're more than happy to do those kind of things. They have an extremely high mobility. They can move very, very quickly on these horses, and so they could surround enemies and things before they even had a chance to react. They're often going to adopt military styles from conquered peoples, though. So, for example, they're going to adopt like siege warfare, which is something that the Mongols don't know very well. And they also are going to break up this kinship military system. Instead, have this decimal army system, as I mentioned before, which was promoted on merit. So if you were a good soldier, if you were a good general, then you got moved higher and higher up into the Mongol military. It wasn't just based upon who you were. It was based around your skills and talents. This is one of the only pictures we have of him. It's not really him, honestly. This is a later version of him that was created by by Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty. So he's very Sinicized in this picture. He's very Chinese sort of looking in this picture. So he's got his sort of robe on there, this wispy beard, and things like that. But we don't really 100% know what he looked like. I mean, he could have looked like that, but he could have looked like other things as well. You can see during his lifetime, this is just during his lifetime, his multiple military invasions. So again, he's going to start off there taking on the Western Xia dynasty, as well as the Jin dynasty and others. He'll make repeated raids across the Karakatay Khanate, into the Khwarezmian Empire, up to the Kipchaks and Volga, Bulgaria, and so forth. And so he will make it all the way to Kiev during his lifetime, which is part of the Ukraine today. So, I mean, that's just an astonishing amount of travel during the course of his life. When he dies, then he will have this enormous empire there in the north, but his sons and grandsons are only going to be ones to expand that. So after Genghis, there's a little bit of an issue. There's a struggle for power among his sons. The first and second son are basically going to fight against each other. The oldest son, Jochi, was probably going to be Genghis's successor. It's probably what he wanted. But there was some question over his parentage. Genghis Khan's wife, Borta, had been kidnapped, and when he rescued her, she was with child. She always said it was his, but it was kind of like, 6-7 months later or something that she was rescued. So there's some question over the exact circumstances with all that. So what happens then is that the Kurultai, the meeting of the Khans, they agree instead to have Ogadai, the third son, to be the one who's in power. Then he will lead an additional conquest of China, which is going to lead to the end of the Song dynasty. Move the capital to a place called Khanbalik, or Beijing, and he will sort of divide the empire up among the brothers and sons. So there's 4 basic parts. They will have the Khanate of the Great Khan, which is sort of the remnant of the empire, like that's the center area, right? The leader in a way. This will end up being called the Yuan dynasty in China. They considered that the leader of the other parts, but by and large that was mostly in name only, especially by the time Kublai ends up taking control. In the middle part of the steppes, middle part of Asia, then, we have the Khanate of Jagadai. He was the oldest son. This is a very steppe region, and later it will be ruled by Tamerlane. Our third one here is the Khanate of the Golden Horde, which is kind of in the area of modern-day Russia. Its capital is at Sarai. and Batu, the grandson of Genghis Khan, is its most famous leader. We're not 100% sure why it has this name, the Golden Horde. We think maybe that gold was a royal color, or maybe it was sort of sunlight glinting off of their shields. There's a couple different stories about where they got that name from. And then the fourth one then is the Ilkhanate. This is going to be the area of the Middle East. It's primarily like Iran, for example. Established by Hulagu, one of the grandsons of Genghis. He is going to be the one who conquers the last of the Abbasids. He is based in Iran, Iraq, and eventually is going to convert to Islam. This Ilkhanate will. And famously, they are going to lose this battle of Anjalut to the Mamluks, which we'll talk about more in a second. So there's 4 total Grand Khans then. We're going to have Genghis, Ogadai, Goyuk, and Monkey. And then after Monkey, then Kublai is next in line, and he will claim that title, but the empire is going to kind of fall apart due to feuding at this point. And so nobody's going to actually respect him as the leader of the empire. Like he's just sort of, a figurehead in a sense, more than anything. So here we can see the divisions and how it's sort of divided up. So you can see the Empire of the Great Khan is going to be over there with China and Mongolia, as well as Tibet. In the middle there, the Jagadai Khanate, then the Ilkhanate down to the left, and in the top part up there, the Golden Horde. So this is the divisions of these different areas. Huge empire. This is the Battle of Ain Jalut. It's a really great story. Basically, the Mamluk are the rulers of Egypt. They were a slave dynasty, weirdly enough. They were formerly military slaves, and they are going to end up coming in and being pretty important and taking over control. And so what happens then is that they see the danger of the Mongols. They see what's going on with these Mongol forces, and they are worried about it. And so what they essentially do is they train a military force purely to defeat the Mongols. Like they have spies and others who are going to investigate and check out the Mongols and their military tactics. They are then going to train an entire force dedicated to defeating them, and then they will force a battle at Ain Jalut where they will actually beat the Mongols. The Mongols lost battles, that's military warfare, but they didn't lose battles this big or this important very often. And so after this defeat, then they will no longer really be able to expand. It's sort of the height of the Mongol Empire. So what is the legacy? This is one of our most important parts about the Mongols. The legacy of the Mongols is, first out, the Pax Mongolica. This is the peace of the Mongols. Silk Road and other trade routes are going to open, which is going to cause all kinds of trade goods and things to go around the world. But of course, it also is going to spread the Black Death and other things around the world. So one part of their legacy is this change. It's also, they're going to shock Muslim society. They saw the Mongols essentially as a punishment from God. And so the eventual conversion of Mongols, however, led to their spreading of Islam. So it's going to really change and shock the Muslim world and lead to a number of changes down the road. Another thing that's very important is their conquest of Russia. So that will lead to the rise of Moscow. Basically, the Mongols are going to conquer Kiev and Rus. This was the original cultural establishment of the Russian people or of the Slavic people, and they will destroy that. So that's going to lead to the kind of domination of serfdom there in that area. They will sort of have a hard time getting rid of it. It will also cut off trade to the west and increase Eastern trade. And this will sort of lead to our long-term issue with Russia, which is it a Western country or is it an Eastern country? But one thing that it does is it protects orthodoxy, which means that Catholicism will not be able to spread into this area. Instead, orthodoxy will be then and continue to be the important thing. And then lastly, China was conquered and had a foreign ruler, the Yuan dynasty. He will overturn that Confucian system, make it more cosmopolitan, but eventually it will be overthrown by the xenophobic Ming dynasty, which will lead to a brand new world, and also means that the Chinese are not going to be interested in foreign trade or going overseas around the time that the Europeans are around. All right, well, hope that helped you out a little bit. Again, one of the things we want to think about is sort of what is their impact, what is their importance in the world, and were they sort of the barbarians that we make them out to be? And I think that probably they aren't quite as much, but I'll leave that a little bit more up to y'all. All right, guys, thank you so much. Appreciate you listening, and I hope you learned a little something today. All right, bye-bye.